Good afternoon, everyone. This is Randy Gottfried, Director of Classroom Support Services. I want to welcome you to the September 29th Campus Budget Update. We'll have a presentation for you, and then we'll have time for question and answers today. So go ahead and use the question and answers feature of Zoom if you want to submit questions to us. That's down there along your menu button in Zoom. And I'll now turn it over to President Roberts to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Randy, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to gather to talk about our update for the budget. For those of you who did attend the board meeting, there will be a lot of similar slides, and this time, of course, conversation from our campus community. But I do want to thank you all for coming. And as we have a little bit of reprieve from our autumn weather, it's a beautiful day, and I hope you had a chance to go out in it, or at least this evening, as we have a little reprise of summer weather. And next slide, please. So what you're going to see is a context of several different presentations that we've done over the last few months and even over the last year. So we're going to do some context setting about some the reasons behind why we've had to make reductions over the last few years, and of course, what is before us this year. So as we recall, starting in March of last year through June, we saw a really sharp decline in our domestic and international enrollment, and that required us to reduce our budget to align that with our expenditures with a more permanent revenue source. And so we began to have that conversation and to pull together the rationale for that and to provide the evidence for that. And so in June, we did propose to the board a $2.385 million reduction to balance our budget. So I do want to just remind us that we went through that process and it was very difficult. It took us over a year to move in that direction. We wanted to take that year to do it so that we were making those sort of really careful decisions. And so a lot of the things that we used in sculpting and crafting that decision are being used moving forward in the decisions that we have before us for our 2021 reductions. The next slide, please. So as we moved through the year, we had an anticipated shortfall of $1.9 million. That was what we had anticipated. But as you know, things occur throughout the year. And one of the things that occurred was that our domestic tuition generation was lower than what we had anticipated. And so that, along with the beginning parts of COVID, did impact our overall shortfall, which ended up being 2.385. And so that's what we actually did reduce our budget going into 2021. 2021. And with that, prior to COVID, we had put ourselves into a position of a balanced budget. It was very difficult. It was very painful. And we did it. And we thought that this year we could move forward and continue to do our work without thinking about having to do another reduction. Next slide, please. In the fall of 2019, we did do an overall budget assessment and review process. Every department, every service, every operation was reviewed. We had over 90 departments do that revenue and expenditure gap. Those proposed changes were reviewed for adjustments and reductions. We took a lot of goods and services in the first reduction that happened for this year that we're in. And a lot of it came out of non-salary positions, not saying that positions were not lost, but the majority of those reductions were done through goods and services and other supports. Part of the process also included an assessment that reflected a need for new positions and a design for enhanced workflow. And so that was also put forward to the board, which they did accept those suggestions going forward. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the areas of reductions that we proposed in winter 2020 were extended days, goods and services at $475,000, new funding revenue at $295,000, travel reductions of a little over 115,000, utilities at 30,000. Our part-time salary and benefits at 485,000, our temporary salary benefits and hourly at 49,000, and our permanent full-time salary and benefits at almost $661,000, and then stipends at 200,000. So you can see that's how we made those reductions. We recommended to the board, and then they did approve it at their March meeting. Next slide, please. As we looked at the changes we had to do in 1920, in terms of fill position, and by that we mean people who occupied that position who were receiving salaries. There were 5 positions that were identified. We did also take 1 vacant position. We added 1.5 positions, so a total impact to an end of 2 people was 4.5 reductions in salary positions. In classified, 3 positions were identified. There were vacant positions that we were not going to fill, were also reduced, and new positions of 7.25, with a total positions impacted of 4.75. But I want to note that the classified staff who were impacted all found other positions at the college, so no classified employees did lose a job in the 1920 reductions. In the faculty, there was 1 faculty position that was identified, and we did increase, based on our CBA, our collective bargaining agreement, 3 new positions were put forward and filled, and so a total of impact was 2 positions. So there was 1 faculty member position that was impacted in the 1920 reductions. Next slide, please. So COVID-19 emerges in late spring, and we quickly made reduction. I mean, we quickly changed our operations and our focus. And again, so grateful to everyone. So unsettling time, but unprecedented time. We would. Excuse me for that. I thought I'd silenced my phone. We had no idea this was going to be as long enduring as it was, but I want to talk more about the impact of COVID on us in the spring. Next slide, please. So you heard, you've seen the slide before, we did have external factors that were impacting us. At that time, there's an anticipated $7 to $10 billion shortfall. I do want to take a moment just to share that on Wednesday, announced in the Seattle Times and in the media, was a revenue forecast that indicated that it would not be as much as $8.8 billion. We have not gotten any confirmation. Typically, those it was very usual for that to come out in the press first without releasing it through OFM to agencies. You get a heads up on what the direction is and information. That has not happened yet. So although there is an optimism in that forecast, we're still waiting for the Office of Financial Management, or OFM, and the Office of the Governor, who typically gives us clear directions about what that means for state agencies and for state entities like us in terms of what we can anticipate reductions or changes. And we have not received that yet. For us, when we heard that back in spring, it was a 15% allocation reduction. That's a permanent loss from the state. We also have our own reductions that are happening to us locally that are not necessarily from an external agency telling us they're going to withdraw or renew or reduce funding to us. We also are seeing a reduced enrollment for the fall. Although it was up a bit in the summer, fall is the leading indicator for us for how our enrollment will go for the year. And so that is continuing to decline. So we need to take that into account. And also our COLAs, which are permanent impact on our ongoing budget. And so we need to look at that. And as we looked at all those factors, the estimated reduction for us was $8.3 million. So one of the things that we know, a lot of our budget does come from the state. We saw a decline in our enrollment over the last 2 years. And of course, the majority of the work that we do is through people. And so that's reflected in our budget. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm going to ask Vice President King to make to talk about our enrollment trends.
Good afternoon, everybody. As conveyed in the budget presentation to the board last week, this slide was presented. I'll make note that we made a slight adjustment in this slide, and you'll see that adjustment in the bottom line. We realized in the presentation that the line for basic skills FTE was incorrect, so you should see that now corrected. I'll comment on that as I go through this, but just briefly as an overview again, the inclusion of the slide is really a matter of demonstrating change over time in some of the key categories that we look at. The slide was not necessarily a slide that was utilized as we're thinking about budget reductions per se, so just comment on that. It's just a reflection of what's occurred over time. 2015-16 total FTE 5467. This past year finishing in spring 5086. An overall 5-year change of a decline of about 7%. If you look at the categories below, the question came up, so I'll try to be clear, and it's indicative of the enrollment report that comes out daily. If anybody wants to get it, we can send you that link. The next 4 lines are those that comprise the total FTE. So international contracts, state supported CEO, running start, and a little other miscellaneous are those categories that then comprise the total. You see some change over time. Definitely a shift in international contract. Again, remember, moving into the 2016-17 year, prior years, we were able to count the FTE for international. Moving into that year, we were no longer able to do so. We only count 2% of that, but you've nonetheless also seen a decline, and that's indicative of you've followed higher education for years. It's also indicative of cycles of policy change and other reflections, but a team hard at work. Nonetheless, state supported, you see down about 5% from 5 years ago. CEO, a decline. Running start has maintained and actually done quite well in the last couple of years, continues to do so even as of this morning. Categories that are below running start then, worker retraining, aerospace, new to shoreline, veterans, online, and basic skills are representative categories because it's areas we look at that are reflected in sometimes differentiated FTE, and we've been tracking some of those. They're not inclusive of all categories, and they're not mutually exclusive as well. You will note, though, that you do see some declines in, if you go to the bottom, the online FTE, that there has been growth there. And again, remember, in online FTE as represented through spring, we're still categorizing through spring and coding online FTE separately from the arranged category. So that is a fairly good representation of our schedule construction and students' intention to take courses online, and most likely both the Department of E-Learning and the faculty who have been involved in building an online program and presence at Shoreline. And then the last line, basic skills, is, again, remember the combination of our ABE team and our ESL team, but only as a relationship to domestic. The ESL portion, which is EAP designation, is embedded inside of international contracts. So declines in ESL are seen most predominantly in international. You see a fairly steady pattern of FTE, some growth over time, and then a slight decline in the last couple of years. But again, predominantly declines in basic skills FTE are in international. We don't define them as basic skills, and ABE is a sub of ESL, is not listed there, but it's actually maintained fairly well with 2 full-time faculty at about 90 to 92 FTE over the course of the last year. And again, last comment would be on an annual or on a daily basis, please remember there is an enrollment report that comes out. And if you have a Shoreline ID, anyone can get that and get that automatically sent to their account so they can just see where we are. This morning, if you hadn't seen it, we're about 8.7% down, 7.6 in domestic, 15.9 in international contract. We're still in the middle of enrollment, still in the middle of a drop add period. So you'll see some fluctuations over the next 2 weeks where we kind of settle into our fall FTE. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Vice President King. I appreciate it. Next slide, please, Randy. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our Vice President for Business Administrative Services, Dawn Beck, and she's going to give us a little bit of background on our financials. Dawn.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Next slide, please. The first thing I want to cover is the CARES Act funding and also the GEARS funds. We did receive some emergency funding related to the COVID pandemic, and I want to talk a little bit about the type of funding that we received and the expenses that we have that are eligible to apply against that funding. So the first funding we received was the CARES Act funding, which was $1.2 million intended to provide students with emergency funding. So we are a pass-through for this $1.2 million to get those funds directly into the hands of our students. So while this doesn't help with our operating gap, what it does do is it helps to support our enrollment and it helps to support our community of students. And so we have about $1 million of that left to disperse, and that will be done during fall, winter, and spring quarters. Next slide, please. So then we also received $1.2 million worth of institutional CARES funds, and that is intended to help support our operating fund and some of these additional expenses that we have related to the pandemic. We also received $360,000 worth of GEAR funds. We were hoping that number would be closer to $1 million, but it came through the state allocation, and the way the allocation was calculated, unfortunately, we came up really short on that one, but we did receive $360,000. So there's about $1.5 million worth of COVID emergency funds available to us. And then the expenses that we have related to COVID that are eligible to be applied against those expenses. The largest one, of course, is student housing. We are at below 50% occupancy in student housing. And even if we wanted that to be higher, we couldn't, because that is the occupancy we're allowed to have for COVID safety. Each person has to have their own bathroom and that kind of thing. So 50% is the maximum that we're allowed to have during the pandemic. What that means is with fewer people paying rent, we no longer have that income to offset the COP bond that we have that was used to build the building. It's not a permanent gap. It's a temporary COVID gap that we're going to need to fill with either COVID emergency funds or operating funds. One way or the other, we do have to pay the bond. We also have less income related to parking permits. People are not driving to campus and purchasing parking permits. We still have all of the expenses that went to help offset, those fees went to offset some of the expenses that we have in operations, and we've lost that revenue. Also, when we closed the child care center, and we furloughed folks, there was a significant cost around the closing down of that center and supporting our staff during that time. And there was some related DSHS funding that we lost that revenue. There was a number of events that were scheduled to take place on campus that we had received deposits for. Those all had to be refunded. And then the last line, computers and PPE for $746,000, that is a continuing expense. So that is an amount that continues to grow as we purchase computers for students and staff. If we need to send extra monitors out to folks, or standing desks, or even as basic as masks and hand sanitizers. These are all expenses that we were not incurring before the pandemic and are directly related to the pandemic. So they are eligible for CARES emergency funds. So we so far have $1.9 million worth of expenses and $1.5 million worth of revenue. So there's an additional $400 gap that we do have to fund out of operations. And in addition to that, we're currently in bargaining with the faculty for funds to them related to converting the classes from in-person to online. Next slide, please. So this is our draft scenario for the 2021 budget. Now, remember, related to this, Cheryl said that as we were developing this budget with the most recent information that we had received from the state, rather than sending us a letter that changed our amounts, they kind of released an amount to the Seattle Times without giving us any kind of heads up at all. So while it's good news, that's not reflected in this yet. So this is the most recent information that we had at the time this budget was developed. So initially, the state sent us a letter that said we could expect a 15% reduction in our state allocation. That combined with the increase from the allocation they actually gave us was about a $2 million decrease in state allocation revenue. Additionally, as of a month ago, our enrollment was trending way off for fall quarter. It was down on average 20%. That fortunately has also started to trend in a more positive way. As Philip said, we're only down about 8% now. So there's fortunately, this was a really hard budget to do because the numbers were so dire, and we've spent a lot of time and a lot of concern trying to develop this budget, and we're very, very relieved to see the numbers starting to get better. We still have to prepare a budget on actual information from the state. So we're still waiting to hear from them. So as of the last information we actually had from the state, we had a $6 million shortfall in revenue. Additionally, we honored our contracts for COLAs, and that increased our loss by $887,000. Now, one thing that's a little bit different here is normally a budget is built from the prior year budget, because we do it before the end of the year. So we don't know where we're going to end up at the end of the year. So the best information we had is last year's budget plus where we're trending. Since COVID delayed all of our budgeting, we actually know where we ended up last year. And so this budget is built based on last year's actuals, which is why the COLA has become an expense, and then why we also have to include in the fact that we wound up in a deficit last year. There was a $1.1 million deficit that we need to reduce our expenses so that we don't have a deficit again next year. So the total net position that we were projecting was a loss of $8.2 million. We had already begun to take some actions to close that gap. In the spring, there were some labor reductions done in the spring of about $837,000. We also sent a request out to the campus. Would anybody like to take a little bit more time off this summer, reduce their schedule? And we found some savings there between that and reducing student labor. There was $686,000 worth of savings. And then that left a gap of $6.2 million of additional labor savings that we needed to find, for a total of $7.7 million worth of labor reductions. And we were able to go back in the spring. Remember, Cheryl said that we had to, or I'm sorry, back in January, we did have to reduce our budget by $2.5 million. We were able to find $1.5 million of that savings in non-labor savings. So we really found all of the low-hanging fruit in January already. We were able to find a little bit more. We went back, we found if we did a complete travel freeze, which is relatively easy to do during COVID, we had reduced audit fees. We found some other non-labor reductions for a total of $600,000 worth of non-labor savings, which helped to alleviate that 6.2 number a little bit. So if this budget had been able to be put in place in July, on July 1st for a full year, what this is this represents a balanced budget. We would have had a positive net income at the end of the year of $129,000, which is just basically break even. Since we are working so hard to go through this slowly and carefully and thoughtfully, mindful that conditions are changing, we didn't react immediately and do furloughs or RIFs. We really are trying to operate under the best available information. And so there's we are preserving positions within our community until we have the best available information. And so the cost of that, if we had to implement this $8.2 million reduction, the cost of preserving folks until we had that full information would be $2 million, $2.1 million. And that is proposed to be funded out of cash reserves. So we would actually hang on to our folks, take a loss, use cash this year, and get to a balanced budget next year. So the deficit that was originally proposed is a $2 million deficit based on an $8.2 million loss. Next slide, please. A little bit more detail about the areas of reduction. The $6.2 million of labor reductions is broken out on this schedule between admin, full-time faculty, full-time classified, and part-time faculty. And then, and I'm going to go through it slowly. Sometimes having people just read numbers gets a little tedious, so I'm going to talk briefly about what they are and let you read the slides. Then we also had the spring labor reductions and the voluntary labor reductions for total labor reductions of $7.7 million. We were able to find non-labor reductions in travel, utilities, and audit fees and other items for $603,000 in savings. for total budget reductions of $8.3 million. Next slide, please. So this is a look at cash. And what does our cash position look like for this year? On July 1st, we had $23 million of cash in the bank. Now, remembering that we did have 30, as Cheryl said, we did have $31,000 a couple of years ago, and we did use that to support some budget reductions from a couple of years ago, hoping that the economy would recover, and as the unemployment rate went lower, our enrollment also went lower. And so the recovery that we had hoped for when we used some of that cash didn't happen. So as of July 1st, we have $23 million in cash. There are $12 million worth of reserves, board reserves. And the purpose of those reserves is to make sure that we can, for example, take care of our campus in a capital fund. We have a campus that was built in 1964, and there's moss growing on the roofs, and we're working really hard to keep that up to date and just keep up general repairs. We have things like innovation funds, which allows us to fund ideas for growth. So it's important to have some of these funds set aside. And then new this year, we have proposed a debt service reserve. This is the first full year of operations for the 7,000 student resident building. And it just, it makes sense to have 1 year of that bond payment in board reserves, especially with COVID. That became very, very clear. So after the $12 million worth of board reserves, we also have some commitments. So we do have to pay this year's debt service of $1.5 million for the COP bonds. We need to send the City of Shoreline $2 million for the roundabout that was part of the building of the 7,000 building. And then we're moving our dental program, and the cost to us will be $1.3 million for that move. So total commitments are $4.8 million. Then the proposed deficit was $2 million, and that left a cash balance of $4.2 million. And after reserves, the cash in bank with the reserves is 16 million. So the very last box there kind of gives you an idea of what does that money mean for operations? How long could that last us if we needed it? And as a college, we spend about $4 million a month, and 85% of that is on our people. Our people are the heart and the soul of our college. And without reserves, we have about 1 month's worth of cash. And with reserves, we have about 4 months worth of cash. So we are, during this economic downturn, also really keeping an eye on building a balanced budget and being very mindful that as much as we would like to just be able to support this downturn using cash reserves, it's not feasible, and it's the reductions from the state are permanent. It's a steep drop, and then if it goes up, it'll go up in little amounts like it does every year. So it really is just this permanent drop, and so it's not something that we're able to support out of cash. We actually have to change our college to match our new revenues. Next slide, please. And handing it back to Cheryl and Veronica.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So we'd like to just remind us all about the process that we went through to begin building our budget for 2021. We use similar budget principles around equity, quality, and access as really important, of course, as principles and guiding ways of thinking about what we do. We wanted to make sure that we were respectful and inclusive and treating each person with dignity as we go through the process of the reduction process. We want to incorporate a long-term plan and forecasting that again aligns with our strategic plan. And we want to align with realistic projections, and that's what you saw today. You know, realistically where we are, what the circumstances are both on our campus as well as in the state and nationally. And then we wanted to look at how the state allocation model, which is a growth model, and how it has impacted us over the last few years, and particularly recently. We wanted to do some forecasting of tuition, which you saw in the information that Vice President Beck shared, and enrollment and retention trends. We wanted to allow for some innovation, which we continued on this year to increase enrollment, to look at ways to generate revenue and encourage efficiencies. And then proposals would be guided by historical data and future projections, which I believe we shared, and input from all employees, which we did through our survey. All of our budget and our efficiencies should not be based simply on reallocating of the work to other employees as we make those adjustments. And that's what we'll be doing as we go through the problem-solving process going forward. And then ensure reserves are according to the board's policy, which Vice President Beck shared. Next slide, please. So let me make a little bit of a course correction. I said the pandemic started in spring. It started actually sooner than spring, but we began to respond as a college and as a state to the pandemic in March. And so we realized, and the state Office of Financial Management and the Office of the Governor indicated quite quickly that there was going to be a projected drop in revenue of which would reflect in a 15% decline in revenue that we anticipated receiving from the state to operate. And so we quickly put together a survey that we issued to all the staff with 3 questions. And we'll talk more about that in terms of respondents and really great solutions that people shared and how we used them. And then we had 3 Zoom hall meetings during the spring to update and to share where we were with what we were gathering on the surveys and what we knew. And then ET, the executive team, reviewed all the proposals and all the survey information. And then at the June 24th meeting, a recommendation was made to the board to do what's called a continuing budget resolution, because we didn't feel like we had enough information to propose a 2021 budget. There was still some thought that the legislature might convene in the summer. There might be a change because it's become sort of a political process because the legislature also weighs in on allocation of state resources. That did not occur. And so it was a good decision that we made to save off a little bit and put the adoption of a budget, which they will do at the end of October. Next slide, please. So over the summer through September, we took all the combined proposals and we spoke with deans and exec directors and managers and developed budget scenarios using the information and the categories that were in the survey around efficiencies, reductions, and revenue enhancements. We did hold a town hall Zoom meeting in August about the budget, and then we continued to reach out to the unions for feedback, and then we did meet with the classified union to hear their budget reduction proposal and some ideas about how to move forward with the budget reduction process. that we're now moving into. Next slide, please. So just to remind everyone, these are the survey results we had in each of the three categories. It's listed on top, and then the different types of categories and the types of responses. Under the budget efficiencies, we had 92 responses, and then some employees sent directly to the Vice President of Student Learning, 6 responses, which we incorporated into the survey. So just wanted to acknowledge that they were not lost. They were also factored in. There were 4 responses to eliminate programs. Instructional changes were 8 responses. Operations and changes were 34. Personnel changes were 17. Restructuring ideas for programs were 5. Streamlining the process was 7, technology changes was 7, and then 4 that didn't quite fit into any category, but we wanted to make sure we captured it. Then there was a budget enhancement. There were 95 different responses, and the categories sort of shaped in these ways. Added or expand programs, there were 21 ideas. Direct submission, again, to the Vice President for Student Learning with 3. Fee increases, there was 1. Suggestion. Funding changes, 13. Increasing fees, 20. Maintaining programs was 1. Marketing changes was 11. And other was, for instance, selling PPE was an example of that. Personnel changes were 4. Rentals were 17, and there were 2 unspecified in that category. Next slide, please. So in the last category was around reduction. There's 121 different responses, and they sort of fell into these categories. There were 3 that were submitted to the Vice President that were not part of the survey that we incorporated in this category. Elimination of programs, there were 32. Personnel changes, 74. Reduced programs, 9, and unspecified responses, 3. And then there were 51 non-participation responses and 4 questions. I just wanted to let all of us just to recall, there were specific names or programs that were identified. We did not place them into the actual survey that we sent, but as an executive team member, we did look at all of them and considered every proposal that was presented. So subtotal of the survey, 175 respondents and 359 solutions or comments were provided. And the next set of slides, Randy, if you can move forward. Here is an example of how we use the data, and then I want to share the slides and then how the proposed reductions were gleaned from the information that we did receive. So we want to utilize the budget principles and using as well best practices and organizational efficiencies and focus on equity-minded practices and organizational structure. So those things were put in place, but I have to say making a $8.3 million reduction hits every part of our college. And these are painful decisions. They're not easy ones to make. And we know that they impact people's lives and their lifestyle and their income. And so it really was, we really used we used so much of what was presented to us to be able to make those very tough decisions. We made adjustments based on the state loss of revenue was part of the equation, not the whole equation. As you saw, we do have our own budget balancing reductions we need to make, as well as those coupled with the permanent loss from the state revenue that impacts our allocation. Use full budget survey data and comments. We did that we wanted to be as transparent as possible, but we also wanted to be respectful. So we did, there was some parts that were anonymous, but we did look at all of the data as an executive team. We aligned our costs in a scale to our known revenue. And I think that dealt with one of our major budget principles was that we wanted to make sure that we were doing things based on actual information and building our budget based on that. And we did use cash reserves. That was an interest I highlighted here. of many suggestions in the solutions, and we are going to do that. And that was in order to provide the additional months past July 1, when our budget goes into in effect, that we wanted to make sure that we could not make those kind of reductions then, that we would have this quarter to look at where we were and get all the information to be able to make those reductions by the end of this year, beginning next year. Next slide, please. Thank you, Randy. So in terms of budget efficiencies, the highlighted areas were the ones that we did use going forward in terms of making our recommended budget recommendations that now will go into a period of solution and discussion. Continued remote operations and working from home was one of the suggestions. Freeze of vacant positions, you'll see that in our solution. You'll see reduced and restricted travel. We did not reduce the work week or close on Fridays. We still are going to be a Monday through Friday operation. We did take, a lot of the efficiencies are going to be happening around process improvement and around technology and the student experience. And so we're working diligently on those, and we'll be incorporating them along the way as they are identified through our CTC Lincoln process improvement work and mapping. And program redesign, there will be some of that. We did that this last year. And then organizational consolidation and combining of positions, that was definitely some things that we did incorporate into these reductions. Next slide, please. In terms of budget reductions, temporary furloughs tiered, that was one that we are holding as in case we do have additional reductions going forward after January. We wanted not to use them as the primary way to permanently reduce. It's really a temporary solution to a permanent problem, which is what we're seeing in terms of the COVID and the response that we had from the last economic downturn was a very slow rebuilding of state support over about a decade period. There will be, we did use layoffs that were suggested, freezing of vacant positions, reductions in assigned hours, and voluntary requests for reductions. Many employees did themselves ask to have their schedules and reduced this year. We did reduce some contracts. We offered limited tenure buyouts to faculty, and we did reduce administration. The reduction of operations is across all areas in the college, so that we were looking at that from a position that we wanted to have sort of this balance in ways that so that we could continue to operate and provide services to the college and to our students. And so that was also considered. So next slide, please. For revenue enhancement, there were some fees that we looked at increasing. We hope to have rental income at some point when we're open again. We did look at new marketing strategies because the marketing budget was reduced. We're hoping for more contract training for continuing ed as that grows, particularly as we come back from being mostly remote. And then the development of new programs and certificates. That was also one of the areas that we looked at. Next slide, please. I'm going to ask Executive Director Zura to come and talk about our projected vacancies and field reductions.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.
So for those of you who were at the board meeting on Friday, this is the same slide that was presented, and it captures the change in the reductions in positions across 2019, 2020, 21, so the last 2 years, broken down by employee type and whether it was a position that was filled, meaning a person in the position, or a vacant position that was identified for reduction. We have a reference to the total reductions by employee type, and then also the percent who lost jobs. And again, that's using the number related to filled positions, so actual employees in a position who are no longer with the college or whose position is no longer here, related to the employee group as a whole. So in 2019-20, you can see that there were 3 filled administrative exempt reductions, 5 vacant reductions for a total of 8, which represented a 3.41% reduction across admin exempt employees at the college in filled positions. There was also a reduction of 3 filled positions and 9 vacant positions for classified last year, a total of 12 positions reduced. And the representation of 0% of those who lost jobs make reference to the comment Cheryl made earlier about all 3 of these positions had another position to move into at the college. And so there were no people that lost their job as a result of the reduction in force in classified staff in 2019-20. In faculty, we had 1 full-time faculty position within our tenured faculty ranks that was reduced. We had 0 vacant positions, so a total of 1, which represents a 0.69% reduction in 2019-20 for full-time faculty positions. Looking at 2021, again, stressing the importance of the word in yellow, these are potentially identified cuts. As Cheryl and Don mentioned earlier, information is changing, sometimes on a daily basis, and the executive team is continuing to adjust and adapt as we receive permanent information related to the funding reductions from the state and also our enrollment information. So based on the information that we know that is confirmed right now, we are potentially looking at a reduction of 6 filled positions for admin exempt, 2 vacant reductions, 13 filled reductions for classified staff, 4 of which are a reduction in percentage or months on contract rather than a full elimination of the position, 15 vacant reductions in classified staff, 17 filled reductions in full-time faculty, 4 vacant reductions, and then across the employee type with percent of those who lost their job, that's 7.5% for admin, 7.43% for classified, and 11.18% for full-time faculty. Across the 2-year period is represented in the final box, which shows between 1920 and 2021, 5.4% of admin exempt in filled positions have suffered a reduction in force, 3.71% in filled classified positions have suffered a reduction in force, and 5.94% in full-time faculty across that 2-year period have suffered a reduction in force. And one more time, the 2021 is potential. These are anticipated cuts. We are looking for options to reduce the number of filled position cuts needed, and a lot is going to depend on what happens in the coming months.
Thank you, Rand. Thank you, Executive Director Dura. Thank you, Randy, for advancing the next line. So what can you anticipate in terms of the process? So right now we are in the problem solving and solution generating period. So we'll be conferring with the union leadership, student leadership, and impacted employees to discuss solutions during the fall quarter. So that's why we needed to put forward these, again, potential reductions so that we can begin to have those conversations. At the regular scheduled meeting in October, the board will adopt a budget, and so we have to begin to look at how we're going to make the reductions in order to meet a balanced budget. And so we have to start that process now with all the information that we have. And then again, we're going to continue to update, adjust the budget scenarios based on confirmed revenue and enrollment changes that we see. And then the final decisions on any reductions that will be happening, we would like to do by early December. And we will always follow the collective bargaining agreements and the administrative exempt contract in order to do that. So those are the next steps in the process. There will be a lot of conversation, a lot of solution. We'll go back and forth to be able to build a budget that is not just balanced, but also reflects who we are and how we can move forward as a college. So the next slide, please. The upcoming meeting is the board meeting is on the 28th. We'll have a study session as we all typically do from 3 to 4. And the regular meeting will be Zoom at 4 o'clock. And then our next budget meeting or update will be on October 15th from 1:30 to 3. So with that, I would like to start answering questions. And I just want to let you know, at our last meeting in August, there was some, and Randy, you can talk more about the technical pieces about how we're doing the Zoom hall. But one of the things that we did want to do was get out the information, at least the slides earlier. We're going to try to do that at least one day prior to. We like to have the most updated information, and we are always working on the slides up until sometimes an hour prior to the meeting so that they are most accurate and what we're conveying to the college is most accurate. And so I just want to share that. And then I just want to just begin by saying, you know, this is a very difficult time and it's very painful. And I know it's heart-wrenching and just disappointing. And because we've worked so hard as a college to serve our students and to do all the things to grow our enrollments and to do it in an innovative and caring way. And we are at this moment in time that we have to make reductions based on some external things, some things that are happening at the college, but I know that together we can problem solve over the next few months, come up with some good solutions and move forward. So with that, Randy, can you talk a little bit about the technology and we'll answer questions?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Roberts. We are using Zoom's webinar product, and the way Zoom has designed that product is very limited on our abilities to create a community feeling like we used to have in the main dining room. So it does not give you the opportunity to see a participants list, see questions, things like that. We are going to look at other ways to have these community events to continue on what we did before convocation so we can come together as a community. But for these events that have over 200 people in attendance, it's very hard to manage any type of situation where we'd have a lot of cameras together, a lot of microphones together. So the webinar room gives us that capability of coming together, presenting the information, and then taking your questions in the Q&A form here, and you do have the ability to check the box, make it an anonymous admission to us, and that's very similar to what we had during our main dining room meetings when you would write your question down on the cards and then they were collected. So we'll continue that way. We're always looking for new technology, new options, and what's available to us. But right now with the Zoom product the way it is, we are dealing with those constraints.
Thank you, Randy. And
we'll have about the next half hour here. We do have some questions that have come in. Go ahead and put your question in. We'll get through as many as we can, and we'll follow up on the questions we don't get through. Or if there's any questions that require additional information, additional research, we'll get those answers to you as well. And the session is being recorded, and we'll have the recording available to campus here within a few days. The first question, and I think it's maybe part of one that's further down as well, talks about shoreline faculty have been offered retirement incentives. When can longtime shoreline staff of retirement age expect the same consideration?
So thank you, Veronica. I know she's going to help me answer this question. So both unions have different collective bargaining agreements, which give us the ability to offer what we call 10-year purchase buyouts. And so we can do it in a limited way with the faculty. That doesn't give us the same flexibility in the classified union contract. And so, Veronica, thank you for hopping on. I know you know that contract so well. So if you would also respond, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. First, I want to clarify, no faculty are being offered an early retirement incentive. That particular phrase has a specific meaning that implies a early retirement incentive plan has gone through the Office of Fiscal Management and been approved by the college for use that would apply to all positions within a particular employment category of the college. The problematic issue with using an early retirement incentive is that part of the condition of the plan is that it must be offered out to all employees meeting retirement eligibility guidelines within a particular employee group. And in many instances, it results in people getting a retirement incentive that is a cost to the college, where the college then has to go back and replace that position. So it doesn't end up helping us to identify a reduction in an area necessarily where we need it. It's open to everyone. And so I know that this is a question that has come up through the classified staff and through the faculty. And I'm just going to say it again. We are not offering any early retirement incentives to faculty or staff or administrators at the college because it is not something that we can move forward with at this time. There's no plan to introduce it, in other words. What we have done is identify within the contracts that we have available to us options for each employee type. And one of those options is tenure purchase. So that is not specific to retirement age. That is open to faculty under certain conditions at the college. And that is one of the mechanisms we use to try and identify faculty who may be interested in leaving their roles voluntarily that would help us reduce the number of reductions in force needed for faculty positions. For classified staff, they don't have a tenure option buyout in their contract because they don't hold tenure in a position. So we have started discussions with the classified union to ask about what other colleges are doing, if there's some opportunity for us to come up with an incentive that would be useful to the staff in certain areas, and are working on that problem, but don't have a final resolution at this time.
Thank you. Next
Thank you,
question, Randy.
Thank you, Veronica. Please justify the college decision to cut the Multicultural Center and Gender Equity Center staff down to 10-month contracts. The entire ESL program, all of the Running Start staff, and half of the Counseling Center staff, especially in the light of the college's supposed diversity and equity values.
So I just want to say that to be able to reduce our budget by $8.3 million, we did ask each executive team member and to look at providing different alternatives going forward. And we did it in a way that we tried to preserve as much as possible all the different areas. And so as you see any of the reductions, we really it was very difficult to even bring up any reductions after cutting $2.385 million. And so the ones that we did bring forward, we did because of the large and honestly daunting budget reductions, not always reluctantly. All of the reductions were brought up reluctantly, but we had to look at how we could move forward as a college, but also make reductions. And these are the ones that were moved forward for more conversation and solution discussion. But these were the ones that were moved forward.
Thank you, President Roberts. The next question. The statement that the ultimate goal of the college is always to preserve as many positions as possible throughout the difficult budget reduction process does not stand. The current proposal reduces teaching by about 25% and guts staff positions that the college cannot function without. The contract may forbid, if not prevent, backfilling, but there is work being done by staff you would eliminate that cannot be done or trained by anyone else for weeks.
Yes, I know. I mean, preserving as many positions as possible is always where we are moving toward. And as I said, it's very difficult to do with such a large, daunting number to reduce our revenue by. And so our goal was to look at vacant positions first. And you saw in the slide that the majority of a large percentage of for classified and for and admin was that. And then for faculty, there were 4 vacant positions, and then a limited conversation for tenure buyout. And so those are the strategies that we're utilizing to reduce the impact on employees who are potentially could lose their jobs. And we know that that is upsetting and life-altering, and so we wanted to limit it as much as possible. And that's what we believe that we have done. And it never feels good because they're people that we care about and the people who have provided great service over the years, and yet we are in this position. And so that's why we wanted to get the information out soon. We can have these conversations to problem solve and create solutions over the next few months. But we still at this point have a very large reduction ahead of us, and so these are the ones that we have put forward.
Thank you. The next question. What does the overall proposed position changes, 1920, look like if we measure full-time equivalent employees, which is a way of including part-time employees?
I think we'll have to spend some time and get back with you on that answer. I don't have that information in front of me. So I'd like to place that into the category of we'll answer that more fully in the response.
Okay. The next question asks, what is the college's plan to continue to distribute emergency aid funds to students when E-Team has decided to cut back on contracts of people who are running the emergency aid program?
So I think, one of the things that we will need to talk about, which is one of the solutions, is looking at maybe doing some combining. Those are all the solution things we're going to have to talk about going forward in terms of how we are going to distribute those funds. And that's a problem-solving question that we'll have to consider going forward if those reductions are held.
Thank you. The next slide asks, if Running Start has grown over 50% in the last 5 years, per Philip's slide, how can you show that there is a deficit in Running Start in the budget scenario for 2021?
So as we looked at the budget scenarios, we were very conservative in Running Start. We weren't sure if students would want to come to the college or stay at their home high schools. And so we did take a more conservative approach to that. We are looking at what's happening, and it is up, and that's a good thing. We're glad that we are seen as a alternative for students to stay in their high schools to complete their high school experience. So that's something that we will be adjusting as we see a positive trend for coming to college from high school.
Thank you. The next question asks, do we still have money to give to students that are in need?
Yes, we do. We still have the student CARES dollars. We were very wise, I think, in portioning it out over spring, summer, and then fall, winter, and spring of this academic year. So we have about $1 million to give out over the next 3 quarters, and we're giving that out right now. And that's going to help us because those students are going to use those dollars to pay tuition and to help them pay living expenses and books and all the things they need to stay in school. So I am very pleased that we did that, and I'm very grateful and thankful to all those who are helping to distribute those funds, as well as our foundation, who's also coming alongside to support our students during this very trying time.
Okay, the next question refers to slides 7 and 27, where it is mentioned that one FTE member were cut in 1920. However, that doesn't match the reality of cuts experienced by the full-time faculty members. It is clearly inaccurate to say that one full-time faculty member was cut in 2019, 2020, when when there were 5 faculty members that were suffered cuts. This completely invalidates the data of the slide.
Cheryl, can I answer?
Yeah, sure. I was going to thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I think it's important to remember that the cuts we made in June were specifically identified as cuts that we were taking for 2021. So there were 5 administrators who did not get a renewal of contract, and they are included in the reductions we are taking because the impact fiscally is for 2021 forward. The same can be said for Ann Colpitt's, Kanchana Kularatne, Jordan Lee, and Maria Tungle's reduction that were identified for the spring quarter that were specific to the 2021 year in terms of salary savings moving forward.
Thank you, Veronica. I appreciate that explanation. The next question asks, is the $2 million roundabout cost one time only?
Yes, that is correct. It's a one-time cost.
Thank you. The next question, it is good practice to have sufficient funds in a budget. COVID reminds us of that. Why didn't the college have the good practice in place for the pub and other construction? Why are there so many gaps? Not at all Stuart T. in practice for our school budget. Were there practices in place that fell by the wayside because of certain administrators?
I'm not quite sure. So,
Dr. Roberts, would you like me to speak to this?
yeah, you can, but I'm just trying to think about, the good practices in place for the pub and our other just constructions. So part of the issue that's come up, I mean, I can't really talk about the pub because I wasn't here, when that was put together, but those dollars were a joint project, a joint venture for the certificate of participation between students and the college. And so students have paid for that construction of the pub. We're almost at I think we have maybe 4 or 5 years left on that COP or certificate of participation. And that project was, I believe was managed well when it was put together, and the dollar amount to pay for it to cover that cost is what we're having to pay as part of our COP. Dawn, did you want to respond as well?
Yes, I just want to add in that the amount that's reserved by the board for the COP is related to student housing and not to the pub and the other construction projects. As Dr. Roberts said, those are funded by non-operational revenues. And the gaps that we're having right now are directly related to COVID. We did have a budget in place that was going to be budget neutral, that we had budgeted to be slightly positive and start kind of maybe slowly replenishing some of those cash reserves. And there were good practices in place. They just didn't have a chance to come to fruition yet before COVID hit. So we are still on a good track. We just need to get through this, this immediate financial crisis brought on by the pandemic.
I should say about the COP for the pub, it's quite a bit smaller. It's I think it's about $300,000 a year, and not that that's not sizable, but it's definitely not the $1.5 million that is represented in the housing project, and that's why the board has directed me to put together a procedure for them to have a debt service for $1.5 million for future in the future. And that, again, you're absolutely right. It is good practice to have cash balance and reserves in place for extraordinary circumstances. And we're living in an extraordinary time with things that keep mounting on each other in terms of impact on us and the work we do and our families. And so having that is absolutely good practice. And I concur with you on that.
Thank you. The next question. In order to reduce full-time faculty in a RIF unit, all part-time faculty have to be gone for that unit. Please provide us with a numerical financial scenario in which reducing the number of part-time faculty in ESL, math, or English in order to reduce the budget by 2 to 4 full-time faculty in each unit is cost savings given required reduction in number of classes offered in those departments. Please provide us with the math accounting that is being applied that would result in the RIFs you're recommending with the loss of income from the enrollment in those classes.
That's a question that we'd like to respond after this so that we can provide the information. It's quite detailed. So thank you for the question, and we'll definitely respond.
Okay, the next question. It feels like there is never enough time to ask and answer questions during these meetings because so much of the time is taken up by the PowerPoint presentation. Can we please either schedule a longer meeting to account for this or have a town hall style meeting that focuses specifically on time for question and answers? It took several weeks to get written answers to the unanswered questions from the last meetings, so just having time to go through a couple of questions during these meetings and then saying everything else will be sent out via email does not feel adequate or transparent.
I think in the future one that we have, we did a lot of summarizing of what we shared with the board. There will be less, our goal is to have less PowerPoint and more time to answer questions. I'm looking, there's now 56 questions that are there. And so I know that we won't be able to get through all of them, but and many of them are very detailed, like the question you asked before, and we have to go, and we want to answer them as thoroughly as possible. So our goal in the next round is we've set the context. We don't have to go back and do that. We'll just be updating information and going right to the questions. So that's our goal for the future.
Very good. The next question. Can you please elaborate on the temporary furlough option for classified staff? If a person were to choose a temporary furlough, would their position be looked at as more likely to be eliminated?
So I'm going to ask, that temporary furloughs are not something that we're looking at as a solution for our permanent budget problem, because it's just, again, temporary, and it's very disruptive to those who are working, and so that's not something that we're looking at unless there is a situation that comes up that suddenly we have to reduce our budget and we have to do it this year past this initial reduction that we're proposing going forward. So more likely. I don't think someone who, for instance, we have people who will voluntarily ask for a reduction in hours. No, that's not, we would not necessarily focus on them as a potential reduction. That's something that they chose to do for a variety of reasons, and we did not ask them to do that. And it helped their personal situation. It also helped the college, but their personal situation. So that's why we did accept those requested voluntary furloughs. I was trying to think of the right word, voluntary furloughs. But Veronica, you understand the furlough process better than I, so I'll let you, if you have anything additional to add there.
Sure, and I think you pretty much captured it. I think the question was basically if you volunteer for a temporary furlough or some kind of temporary reduction, is it going to put you at risk? Like we're suddenly going to look at your position? And no, the answer is we're not looking to say, oh, somebody volunteered, maybe we can just cut their job. In all instances, across the board for temporary furloughs or for reductions in force, we are trying to figure out where we can either eliminate or somehow put work on hold or come up with some new creative temporary solution. It is not the case that we have too little work at our college. In fact, we all have full jobs and spend our days trying to do everything we need to within the time frame allowed. So for those that have volunteered for temporary furloughs, your volunteering is much appreciated, and it has provided us with some temporary relief this year, and we want to say thank you again.
Thank you, Veronica. There's a next comment. Saying it again and again does not mean it happened. We know this from the current U.S. president. The college wants to claim process, respect, inclusion, consultation, shared governance. We need you to stop saying what you wish came true, not what actually happened. So you cut entitles out of the conversation. So you contact show steward and teacher union to give information, not received it. It doesn't have to be pretty, and the board will do anything for this president. It's better if it's the whole truth and not an edited version. So that was a comment that came in. If there's any response to that. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Why are the faculty cuts focused on revenue positive allocation and tuition programs with no cuts in high cost revenue negative programs? Why are we adding new divisional administrative positions while eliminating FTE producing faculty positions?
As we look at the whole, as I said, the large number that we had to get to in order to balance our budget, there was no way not to look at across all programs to do some reductions, even in areas where we were creating some positive revenue, and that's always very difficult because as I said, we did all the other reductions we made were mostly non-employee, full-time, not part-time, but full-time employee in the first 20 reductions. And now we had to make very difficult decisions, even looking at those areas that were producing some revenue, because we knew that we had to make the reductions as we knew it then. And again, we'll make some adjustments based on new information, and we will be doing more problem solving and solution based with our two unions and impacted employees going forward in the next few weeks and the next month and a half. So that's my response.
Okay. Thank you, President Roberts. The next question. For positions that are actually eliminated, when would the position no longer exist? When would the employee actually stop working at this job?
So our goal right now is to have, it's a little bit different for each employee group. But for the classified, right now we're looking at an end date at the end of this year. December 31st. And that's why we wanted to start the process now to do as much problem solving. We're going to have final decisions in December, but the process for faculty is different than for classified and for administrators, and that can go longer than December 31st, but we would identify those programs by early December, as we mentioned, so that we can continue to move forward and let people know so that they can have the time to make those changes in their own personal circumstance.
Okay. Please tell details of who received tenure buys. everyone over 57, everyone at the college with more than 20 years, everyone in departments to be cut.
I don't see where.
It's a couple. There were a few comments about technology that we can address before that, so I skipped a couple down.
I now don't know where you are. I'm sorry. I'm kind of lost now.
Let's see if I can. It's better.
Oh, I can just talk in general about the 10-year purchase. We looked at those areas that enrollment or limited enrollment. That was some of the things we looked at offering a 10-year purchase.
Okay.
The key was for us that we weren't looking to do backfill because, again, that's one of the, we don't want to purchase a 10-year line and then have to go back and then open it up for another full-time faculty position.
Okay. The next question, what does projected vacant and filled positions look like in terms of dollars rather than headcount?
Where are you, Randy? In the
It came in at 2:24 p.m. Yes.
I see it now. Thank you. And thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. What does projected vacant look like in terms of dollars rather than headcount? The majority of our, except for about $600,000, all are represented in that $6.3 million reduction that we had to make. So we can get that information to you, but Dawn, I can't find you. The majority of the reductions are in people. Very few non-employee reductions this round because we took them in the first round in the 1920 reductions. Did I capture that, Dawn?
Yep, that is correct. In January, we did $2.5 million worth of reductions, mostly through, or the large portion of it was non-labor. 80 to 85% of our costs are labor. So without any other ability to cut non-labor cost, then this time we're having to make the harder decisions.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, coming up a little before 3 here. How many people are working a percentage of position and being paid full medical in each category, classified, exempt, admin, and faculty? And in any other light you can shed. Is that kindness more expensive and harmful to Shoreline's budget than just kind? Where does the cost show in the budget and the slides?
I think we're going to have to take that and put it among those that we answered. Oh, Veronica?
I can give a little bit of an answer. So I think the question, it's stated correctly. The college pays the same amount for healthcare and benefit coverage for someone working less than full-time or less than 12 months out of the year. The healthcare authority doesn't prorate based on your FTE or months on contract. It's not a large amount. There's less than half a dozen in classified, less than half a dozen in admin, and probably right about the same number in faculty, although there's a little more variability just because the faculty contract does outline the use of at least 3 pro rata contracts each year.
Thank you, Veronica. We have reached 3 o'clock. As President Roberts mentioned, a lot of questions have come in today, so we will get through those and get the responses sent out to you. Also, the captioned recording of this session will be sent out. Also remind you of the upcoming meetings that we mentioned earlier. The next Zoom hall is on Thursday, Thursday, October 15th, 1:30 to 3 p.m. on Zoom. And the Board of Trustees regular meeting is going to be Wednesday, October 28th. And study session 3 to 4 p.m. will be the regular meeting. Dr. Roberts, are there any additional comments from yourself or the executive team this afternoon?
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us and also for the questions. We'll do our best to, we'll get out the majority of them in a week, as we always do when the captioning is done. These are very difficult times, and we need everyone to help us focus on solutions during this time period. And we do have a big budget gap to fill. And as I said, we did the initial one in 1920 with non-employees, and now we don't have that same luxury to do it this time. But we do need everyone to come around those who have been potentially identified and support them, and also helping us with solutions. We are open to hearing them as they pertain to the contracts, and we will we must work within our collective bargaining agreements as well. So thank you so very much. I appreciate everything you do every day, even in these tough times, supporting our students. I know they're at the heart of the work that you do, and you do it so brilliantly, and I'm so grateful for that. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again on October 15th. Just to let you know, I do have my office hour, which I will be doing monthly, and it is this week, and I'll put it back out again. I believe it's Thursday. Lori, can you help me? I believe it's Thursday at...
Yes, it's
Thursday at 1, I believe. Hold on for a second. Thursday at 1:30 to 2:30, and we'll put it out and make sure that if people would like to talk to me individually, I'm open and available. So thank you so much, and hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.